Hello and welcome everyone to the Black Secret Interviews with Brother George. And we have a very special guest today in the form of the veteran broadcaster, Chuck Penn. Welcome, Chuck.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, and it's a pleasure to join you.
Yes. Just for the sake of our Black Secret members, could you give us a little background into who is Chuck Penn? Your formal years and, how you got to become this veteran broadcaster?
Well, it's a long story. My actual entree into doing broadcasting goes back probably when I was 16 years old, because from that time period on, I wanted to get into broadcasting, what I call broadcasting, radio in particular, and television. And I found myself in a situation with a wife and three kids that I had to make some sacrifices. And so I ended up in manufacturing and any number of other different kinds of fields before I finally got a chance to do what my true love was. And that's when it came on the heels of being caught up in a workforce reduction after traveling to and fro around the world representing my company. They called me in on April Fool's Day, only it was not April Fool's, to tell me that I was no longer going to be employed. So it left me in the lurch, and I ended up hooking up with one of the local television stations as a production assistant. And that kind of culminated into me getting an opportunity to do my own show. I had hooked up with a cable company about a year or so before that and started to do a local show. And the general manager at the station who had started the station liked it and gave me the opportunity to bring it in-house. And that's when I got a chance to do Harambe was the name of my show. But it all kind of came out of some activism on my part. I was leaning on two of the local cable companies in the region to get BET. And this was in the very embryonic stage of BET. And so a lot of stations were wondering whether or not it was economically feasible for them to bring it on board. And I championed this grassroots campaign to lean on these two cable companies. And one of them said, well, look, we're not going to pay to get BET, but I'll tell you what we will do. We'll provide you with the facilities in order for you to do your own show. And so that culminated into me starting out on the local cable, and then eventually working for a public television station and doing the show.
And where exactly was that in the U.S., Chuck?
That's in suburban Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia market, which is the fourth largest television market in the country. Right on the outskirts, wasn't in Philly proper, but right on the cusp, what they call the SMSA, the Standard Metropolitan Statistical Arena, which is how the U.S. kind of carves out regions within their various television markets.
Yeah, you see, that's really interesting from like a non-American perspective, because you would have thought like that BET was everywhere, but
well, it was, but this year, I'm talking like 1992, 1993, right around that area. So BET was ubiquitous in places like Philadelphia and Chicago, New York City, some of the major metropolitan areas. But on some of the suburban, on the outskirts of some of those large urban areas, the cable operators were hesitant about bringing it in, but finally they came on board with all of the cheap rump-shaking videos that Bob Johnson made $1 billion off of. That's a different story.
Yeah. Now, you created Harambe TV, and you've interviewed some of the greats. Was it always from the very beginning a conscious outlet?
I have always had an interest in Black history. I always was, and still am. I mean, I consider myself to be a lifelong learner, and that's the reason why I fell on with you guys and Robin and what you put together, is that I just got this thirst for knowledge about who I am, who my people are. So I've always had that interest, and it goes back to the late 1960s when, everyone was really into Malcolm, Ilhaj, Amikla Shabazz, Malcolm X, H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, folks like that were people that really resonated with me, and I was into the Last Poets,
Who was
the
it?
original. Well, yeah, you're right. They were very popular, so they had a really profound impact on me, and so that was really the genesis of my interest in the Black Power movement and in Black history, learning Black history.
Yeah.
So it goes back to that period.
Wow. I mean, some of our viewers may not know this, but I think if they've ever done sort of like a YouTube research into old clips of John Henrik Clarke, Shikanta Diop, um, um, uh, uh, Dr. Ben Yohakinen, Malefa Asante, some of this would have been your work, in fact. What was it like
You're breaking up a little bit, but I think every one of those folks that you mentioned, I've interviewed with the lone exception of Shikanta Diop.
Okay.
I mean, it would be a dream for me to have just been in his presence, but I certainly featured him and in various historical vignettes and that sort of thing that I did. But I interviewed Dr. John Henrik Clarke, the master teacher, and he's my all-time favorite.
He's your favorite.
I got a chance to interview him in his Harlem home. I got a chance to interview Dr. Ben in his Harlem home. Malefi Asante, the interview I did with him was probably still the most hotly contested video that at least I've had anything to do with on YouTube, and that was the show we did with him on Were the Ancient Egyptians Black?
Oh.
And that was like 1993, 1994.
Wow.
And still now, when I go online on my YouTube channel, people are still arguing over that. A lot of naysayers that, despite all these decades that have transpired and all of the data and categories of evidence that we have, people are still arguing that. But I was really pleased to do that show. I did a couple shows with Malefi Asante, and then I did a couple of follow-up interviews with him as well. And I also interviewed Dr. Ali Mazrui, and Dr. Mazrui, who's passed away, as well as Dr. Clarke and Dr. Ben. But Dr. Mazrui was known for the PBS series, The Africans.
Right.
And he was a noted scholar in his own right out of Kenya. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting you're talking about that controversial interview which you had with Malefi Asante, because I didn't know this until quite recently, but there is another important interview, and I didn't realize, which is actually on YouTube. I didn't realize it was actually you who actually interviewed this guy. And this guy was, I think his name is Mustafa Hefy.
Mustafa Hefy.
Now, this guy is really interesting, and people probably have seen him. He's an Egyptian educator who came over to the US, and I always describe him for people as who basically haven't seen him, that he looks a little bit like an Egyptian version of Muhammad Ali with a mustache. So he's that sort of complexion, he's got that sort of haircut, and of course, because he came over here as a Egyptian Arab, he had to classify as white. And he went through lots of trials and tribulations. And it's so interesting because even though he breaks it down there that, in his culture, you see yourself as your ethnicity first and then your race second. And he talks about his dad being darker and his mom being a little bit lighter. And it's all about being culturally Islamic. That's to the fore. But when he came across the racism over here, you know, he said, no, I'm black first. What was that like to meet someone like him?
I met him through Dr. Asante. I think Asante still does the DIOP conference
Right.
at Temple University. You know, they're very proud of Temple University scholars, and as well they should be. That was the first doctoral program anywhere with African. I think it was African American Studies at that time, or it was called Africana Studies. But anyway, I met Mustafa Hefy at that particular conference, and he was embroiled in this battle with the U.S. government to be classified as black, because in the United States, Arabs or Egyptians, to be more specific, are classified as being white. And he took exception with that. And then he started challenging some of the school administrators at the school system that he was working at. And they were telling him, look, you know, you need to shut up about that and be quiet, because you know, these folks are from the jungle and they don't have a history and all that. And of course, he was aware of, you know, being a native Egyptian, that the ancient Egyptians were black and brown, and he knew how that transformation of modern day Egypt took place. And he was articulating it. In fact, I think he was working on his doctorate degree, and he was filing a lawsuit. The last I heard from Mustafa, he was not doing very well.
Oh.
I don't think that he was successful in his quest with the Supreme Court. And yeah, I think he was, the last time I talked to him, he was pretty down, which is tragic. But for me, and for millions of other people that have seen that video, he's a hero.
Yeah.
For standing up for his ethnicity and recognizing that, you know, that the ancient Egyptians were black people.
Like himself.
Yes.
You know, he's someone who is classified as an Arab. He accepts that, but he knows he's black. It shows the complexity of it. And when you see him, he looks as black as Muhammad Ali. It probably has the same kind of racial, percentages and so forth. So it just exposes the hypocrisy, the lies, and the nonsense of how, ancient Egypt has been framed, even today.
And you know what it also does? It brings to mind what Robin has been stressing. And I paid a lot of attention. I'm still learning from the Black Secrets course, and Robin talked about that, how, you know, he emphasized that designated as the United Arab, you know, that Arab is a part of their national identity, their modern national identity. The same thing holds true for Libya, which is in the quagmire since they decided to go ahead and take out Gaddafi. But Libya as well is recognized as an Arab nation, which, as Robin points out very eloquently, suggests that that they are not indigenous to the land that they now occupy, which I thought was an excellent point that he made in one of the courses that he teaches.
Yeah. All of these things need to be unwrapped, and people need to understand it. You know, all of these areas were predominantly black in ancient times, and for various different historical factors, gradually the black population became reduced, moved away, and other groups came into play. But even in these places, even in Libya, there are still black populations, and people need to be aware of that. In modern day Egypt, there are still black populations. There are people like Mustafa who look like Muhammad Ali, who know that they are connected to the ancient ancestry of ancient Egypt. You've done some amazing interviews as well. One that I'm thinking of was when you spoke to a reformed member of the KKK. Do you remember that?
Oh, you saw that? Okay,
What
yeah,
was that
yeah.
like? What was that
Oh man,
experience like?
that was something. In fact, when we were up in the mountains when we did that interview, and the
The
production
mountains where,
assistant that
sir?
was with me in upstate New York, not
Okay,
far from the State University of Binghamton, up in that general area,
okay,
way out in the sticks. And as we were, the production assistant who I had with me I could tell he was nervous about being there with me, the white guy. And there we were up there interviewing this guy that just, that was spilling the beans on the Aryan nation and these white supremacists. And there was a truck or something that drove by and backfired right in the middle, right in the middle of the interview, man. And you can imagine, I can only imagine the expression on my face and his face when the truck backfired. But this guy was very fascinating because he had been indoctrinated in that whole Aryan nation thing. He had been a recruiter. And he somehow or another got a revelation that he was wrong. And so he then began, the opposite, going out and spilling the beans on these guys and that sort of thing, and talking. And he had been also seen on a number of national television shows as well. So that was a very interesting interview there with him. And I'd like to kind of go back and find him. Hopefully he's okay.
yeah,
I found recently that, George, that there's a number of people that I've interviewed besides, the icons that you alluded to that have passed on. Dr. Terry Kershaw, I don't know whether you saw the show I did with him. We did a show on the bell curve. He came out of Temple University, and I found out recently that he passed away. I was really saddened about that, and I decided I'm going to upload the interview that I did with him. It is excellent. I mean, I forgot how good it was because when I interviewed him, I took only the segment when we were talking about Sheikh Anta Diop, the legacy of Sheikh Anta Diop, and Imhotep.
right.
But he and I talked about a number of things, the origins of race. We talked about a whole bunch of things that I'm going to try to get that. In fact, I was working on it this morning, got up this morning and was working on editing that to upload it. I think you'll find that, reinforcing as well for what you guys already know. I don't know if it'll be a revelation because you guys are right smack dab in the middle of the core of the information that we need, but it was a really good interview.
I
But
think,
getting back to the white supremacists, I'd love to
yeah,
find him to see what he's doing now.
yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that you had an interview where you talked about the bell curve, because of course the whole idea of that was that oh, look at these black people, they're statistically low, they must be sub-average, blah blah blah. And now, of course, 20, 25, 30 years later, now who are the people who are getting the highest scores at universities and elsewhere? They're immigrants of Nigerian background for the most part, who are meant to be of a pure stock.
Sorry, George,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to interrupt because it's the audio is just jumping, and then you freeze and you freeze. And I'm thinking about editing. If you can make your questions, I know you want to get into a conversational flow, but if you can make your questions a bit more succinct, then I can subtitle them.
I'm recording it at my end as well, so you'll be able to use my.
Yeah, but I don't know if you're going to have the same audio problems on your recording.
It sounds clear at my end, and I'm recording it a different way.
So it sounds clear your end.
Yeah.
Yeah, Danny, it's very jumpy here. It's Danny, you're hearing what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's what I know. We're hearing the same thing, and it's very jumpy. So
yes.
I don't know, but if you're telling me that you're hearing it clear on your end, George, and you're recording,
and so I'll be able to use my one as well.
Yeah, but still, just in case, let's try and keep it. I don't want to squash you. Obviously, you know what I mean.
Okay.
You've prepared this thing and that, but yeah. Otherwise, I'll have to just cut out whole chunks of what you're saying.
And I was trying to carry it as well,
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chuck. Okay, I'm gonna come out and back to you. Sorry, but I just had to interrupt.
Okay. Just trust that it's coming through at my end, and you're going to have something to work with. because Chuck's
Okay,
coming
cool.
through clear
All
at
right.
my end as well.
All right, I'm going to come off and sorry, back over to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Perhaps there's room for a follow-up, because now we have statistics that show that Black Africans, recent immigrants, are actually the most successful in terms of like their stat scores. And at university, it used to be the Orientals, who were the recent immigrants then, the Koreans and the Chinese and so forth. Now it's the most latest branch of immigrants who are the blacks. So it completely squashes the negative bias against black people that the bell curve came up with.
Right. You know, that show, interesting enough, George, ended up being my last hurrah. That was my last show that I did. I can remember holding up the Bible and saying that our next segment is going to focus on blacks in the Bible, but it wasn't to be, because what happened was the general manager who started that show, who started the station, and who had given me that opportunity, was ousted under a cloud of controversy. And when he was ousted, there was a scandal about monies that were supposedly inappropriately handled. And it was a huge media frenzy over that. And so the board ousted him, and they brought in a temporary consultant with the intent of downsizing the workforce. And everyone who had worked there had been there. I'd say about 90% of the people that worked there had been there since the inception of the station itself, except for yours truly. I think I was the second youngest person there. So what essentially happened is they used that as an excuse to send me packing and with me the show. Now the show was so popular that it created an uproar in the community. And so the community came out and lobbied with the powers that be to retain me and retain the show. Since I had created the show, you know, the prospect of someone else doing it, I wasn't going to allow that, since it was my show. I created it in the first place.
Yeah.
So that couldn't happen. And so essentially what happened, what came out during that period of time that had never been revealed before that, is that some of the folks in the higher echelons of the organization were secretly uncomfortable with the content of the show. Sweetheart, can you please get them? I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
With your dog there.
What came out during that period of time was that there had been some of the elites at the organization that had secretly been uncomfortable with the content of the show. You know, if I brought you on, you know, and I asked you, George, you know, tell us about yourself, and where'd you go to high school, where'd you go to college, and, you know, what's your favorite ice cream flavor, then all is well as good. But when you get a black man on there talking about were the ancient Egyptians black, and talking about Afrocentricity, and the only thing that my station manager that gave me the opportunity told me is that he's a Jewish guy. The only thing he told me was don't bring Farrakhan on the show. But needless did he know, he did not know at the time that I had already secretly been trying to get Farrakhan.
Oh.
But I couldn't get him. So, you know, he didn't know anything about that. But, you know, I had carte blanche when he was in charge. But, you know, they had a real problem with the fact that I was, you know, sharing information that folk they don't want us to know. I mean, that's the reality that we live in today, is that people don't want, some people, and we know who those people are, do not want us to know who we are.
Yeah.
And so long as we keep it on a very simplistic level, they're unthreatened. But when you start talking about start talking about topics that undermines their worldview, then now you're starting to you're starting to get in some tenuous water. Now I can remember Malefi Asante coming out and endorsing me at that time, hoping that they would retain me, and he says, "You have outdone Philadelphia." So what we were doing at that time, okay, if you talk about Gil Noble in New York City, you talk about Tony Brown's Journal, you talk about Listerveld Middleton, who was doing it. I mean, that was the brother that was really killing it. I mean, I would say that, he's up here and I'm down there. I was not on the level of those three shows, but in my own right, I was, ahead of the times in doing that show. And those were the guys. It was the Gil Nobles and the Listerveld Middletons and the Tony Brown Journal is who I was trying to emulate. I was basically trying to do a national show in a regional television environment. And, it was very popular. In fact, to be honest with you, it was very popular with white folks because I did the show in a non-threatening kind of way. And, I wasn't browbeating anyone, similar to how the Black Streaker is set up. There's no recriminations that comes out of your programming source. I mean, it's just evidence-based information that most people don't know anything about. And that's what I was trying to do at that period of time.
Yeah, I think you've done a wonderful job, and I think you don't give yourself enough credit. But I do love those shows that you talked about. Some of them are heroes of mine as well. And I'm not surprised that you had issues with some of the higher ups because of the information that you were given out. But could you tell us, how long did your show run for?
It only ran for 3 years. 3 years. I mean, I maximized everything I could get out of that show. But, I already mentioned to you what happened.
Yeah.
And, and I don't know how much longer I would have stayed in that capacity because I could sense that I was right on the threshold of taking the next step. And I was also secretly behind the scenes trying to promote the show to, Oprah Winfrey. At that time, there was the Black History Channel. There were a couple of burgeoning upstarts that showed promise that fizzled out. But unfortunately, and what's her name that has Radio One, TV One, and I sent them packages and everything else, but
yeah.
The problem that we run into again to this very day is when you have advertising supported programming, the advertisers are nervous about the quality or the quantity or the quality in their mind of the content. And I was unsuccessful in selling TV One and the Black Entertainment. I forget the name of it. There were 3 of them, and none of them BET. I couldn't successfully convince them to to bring me on board and to do something similar. In fact, I envisioned a whole network. I mean, I had it down to promos and how the promos would be, still have it in my mind about the kind of programs we should be seeing right now. I look at television right now, man, and it's pitiful, terrible. Man. We got all these, these reality shows with these buffoons on the air that are, impacting our young people's minds, and it's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. I think the sad truth is that if you scared off those white higher-ups in the organization which you were in, you'd probably be scaring off a lot of black higher-ups in black owned media as well. Because actually, if you look at what you were doing, you were hitting hard. You were hitting really hard. I wanted to ask you, you've done a lot of work with us. You've collaborated a lot with us. And one of the things that you're interested in particular, is understanding and making clear the true length of the Black and African historical timeline. Why is that an important subject for you?
Because that, probably more so than anything, is one of the biggest gulfs in the understanding of our history. And Robin, and I keep saying Robin, y'all are part of the organization, so y'all have done a fabulous job of focusing in on that timeline. Because we, as I'm speaking in generalities, but I don't believe that we as a people have understanding about how extensive our history is. And in fact, how I discovered you guys was I was on Twitter, which is now called X, and I wanted to find someone. I have a timeline here. It's fabulous. It goes back to the mid-90s, but I wanted to see if there had been newer developments that have taken place that may supplant some of the information. And I went on there, and there was a gentleman on there, and he said, "Oh man, you need to get Robin Walker's book, man. You need to hook up with him, man. He got the whole thing in his book." And so, and I was embarrassed that I wasn't aware of his book. Now, the brother wrote the book in 2006. I'm supposed to be a conscious brother, and that was right by me. Of course, I was chasing the almighty dollar in corporate America for a while there, so my focus was in on, bringing home the bacon. But I went ahead and I got the book, and then he says, "Yeah, man, he got an online course, man. It was out of sight." So I went on there and got on it, and and the rest, they say, is history. And that's what drew me to it, was trying to get my arms around the timeline. Not only the fact that it's extensive, that goes back to the very beginnings of mankind, but at what point does what civilization come in? And, Robin does a really beautiful job of talking about prehistory and, some of the contributions that come out of prehistory, moving on into the era of the Kushites and the ancient Egyptians, and then moving on into, West Africa. I mean, he covers the whole scope of the continent. And that's what I was trying to get in my mind. At what point in that timeline do these various civilizations emerge, and with respect to coming forward. So I spent a great deal of time in the Black Secrets ancient period, as well as in the medieval period. Had less interest in the modern period because a lot of that information I had been exposed to. In fact, I haven't even got through that part of it, and I've been back into the ancient period and back in the medieval period multiple times, because there's some fabulous information in there. And it kind of, what you guys have done is you have reinvigorated me to the point that I'm going back and start rereading some of the books that I had. And one of them that I've been rereading, in fact, I even got there's an online version of it where a brother took it and read the book and put it in an audible form, is Destruction of Black Civilization.
Classic
and
book.
As I read that book, I was kicking myself. I'm saying, man, I asked Robin about how, the context of the question I asked Robin was how he critiqued some of the iconic scholars like Chancellor Williams and Dr. Ben and Ivan Van Sertima. And he said that Chancellor Williams had made some mistakes. And when he said that, when I interviewed him, I was hesitant at the time to ask him to elaborate on that, because I didn't want it to be seen as though he was, being critical of an icon. But having said this now, definitely, I'm coming back to Robin. So Robin could tell me what mistakes that Chancellor Williams made, so I can get an understanding as I'm rereading his book, what those mistakes were when he was doing his research.
I'm pretty sure Robin can fill you in on that a little bit later, but I would say that partially it's not so much that he made a mistake, it was more that he was misled. And a lot of scholars were misled at that point into believing that African civilization had been completely destroyed. Our records, our artifacts, and so forth, whereas there was a lot of stuff that was there. So he wrote it from a particular standpoint because he was misled. But his general thesis, well, from my perspective, was correct. But there were certain things that he was misled on. I think with ancient Egypt, he has this idea of the mulatto complex, where people become admixed and they fight against their black parents and support the white side. That's not really how it actually broke down or happened. So he had that kind of he had a few, yeah.
You broke up a little bit there.
Okay.
I think I understand what you're saying, and I can't wait to hear it with complete clarity, because I struggled so much with that aspect of it, because it reminds me of what is happening present day. How much of the admixture of our people, if you will, of us marrying outside of our race and the offspring that results from that, is there any kind of mentality that is created from them that would suggest to them that they are somehow or another superior from those of us who have more melanin in our skin? And it was very interesting to hear that, because Chancellor Williams spent a lot of ink talking about that. In fact, at one point, I think when he was talking about the fact that even the designation of Egyptian was almost used exclusively for this mulatto or this admixture portion of their population, as being separate from the African, the black Africans that were there. So that was really troubling to read that. I mean, it is what it is, but I need some more clarity on that.
Yeah,
for sure.
I don't think it was as extensive as he made it out to be. Kemet, Egypt remained significantly black right up until the Ptolemaic period. The ancient Greeks and Romans typically would describe them as being very black, as it were. So, he was kind of like misled in certain areas. And I think that Robin can clear that up at a later point. But we will continue. I wanted to ask you asked Robin in the last interview which you did with him, what he thought Africa's greatest achievements were and contributions. What is your answer to that? What is your perspective on that?
I think it is the development of the sciences, the development of writing, development of mathematics. I get a kick out of all these folks talking about aliens and the lost continent of Atlantis, and all of these different really crazy ideas about who built those magnificent structures. And Robin at one point when I interviewed him, it talked about, I think it was it modern day Somalians or whatever he was talking about. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially the point he was making was, how many of them know that their ancestors built this magnificent, it was a castle.
Yeah.
And that loss of historical memory, and that's that gulf that kind of ties in with that gulf, with that timeline that we had been talking about, is that we suffer from this loss of historical memory, and so that kind of plays into it as well. I'm not sure I even answered your question, but if I haven't, I'll try again.
I think you talked about the sciences, mathematics, and writing. which is really interesting because a lot of people don't associate that with Africa in any capacity. Whereas, of
Right.
course, that's where it started, that's where it flourished, and that's where it reached genius levels as well, you know.
For
And it's
sure.
important that we document that, like you're saying, because to lose our sense of history, we lose our sense of ourselves as well. I wanted to ask you, we had a conversation earlier on about African American historical figures, and we talked about Martin Delany. I was just wondering, who are your favorite African American historical figures?
This guy right
Okay,
here.
okay, okay.
Malcolm is my, I mean, there are a number of icons that I have over the course of my life. And Malcolm, more so than anyone, it really inspired me. I read his book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, for I don't know how many times. And there are others. I mean, John Henry Clark, Dr. Clark, you hear me talk in glowing terms about him because he was just so eloquent. I mean, he was the wisest man that I've ever been honored to be in the company of. And of course, he was a mentor to Malcolm and an authority on Marcus Garvey. And he did a speech, man, that I posted on my Facebook page not too long ago. It was before an African audience. We have no friends. I don't know whether you've ever seen that speech.
Yeah.
Highly recommend, even if you've seen it, to go back and watch it again. I mean, it was Dr. John Henry Clark at his best. Martin Delany is one of my favorites, and he's one of the least known of African-American iconic figures coming out of the 19th century. He was a contemporary of Frederick Douglass. He and Frederick Douglass started the North Star newspaper. He was like a medical practitioner for a while. He was one of about 5 or 6 African Americans who were admitted to, I think it was either Harvard or Yale Medical School, one of the two. White folks had a hissy fit and ran them out had them kicked out of school, mainly because they were black. And, he traveled internationally. The Brits exploited them, and the Brits kind of used him, and he knew he was being used because he was using them as much as they were using him. But they kind of used him to elevate themselves over the U.S. insofar as their policy towards enslavement. And so he traveled in a lot of the high-level thinkers of that era. He was just a proud black man. And like I think I'd mentioned before, Frederick Douglass is quoted as saying that he said that I said to, this is to Martin Delany, I said that, so I thank God that he made me a man. And Martin Delany's response was, I thank God that he made me a black man. And the brother was dark skinned, and he embraced himself, and he also was the first major in the Union Army.
Yep.
He walked into Lincoln's office, and Lincoln had obviously was aware of him and says, "Well, Mr. Delany, what can I do for you?" And Martin Delany reportedly said, "No, Mr. President, I'm not here for what you can do for me, it's what I could do for you." And he went on to tell Lincoln that he wanted him to make him major. And so Lincoln appointed him major, and then he went about the business of recruiting brothers to fight in the Civil War. He was a bad black man.
He was.
And if you ever, he gave a speech, man, that was a work of art, man, when I think it might have been Zachary Taylor, one of the presidents, they passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which meant that enslaved Africans that escaped to the north and escaped out of slavery or bought themselves out of slavery, or whatever the case might be, that these slavers could come after them and enslave them again. And he gave a speech in Pittsburgh that was absolutely magnificent, that simply said, if any man crosses the threshold of my door, and I do not leave my lifeless corpse at my feet, that I hope the grave denies my body. I mean, it was much more eloquent than that, but that was a bad black man right there. I'm big time, as you can tell.
Yeah.
I love me some Martin Delaney.
Yeah. He was also an inventor and an Egyptologist as well. And
yes.
He knew that our people, the ancient Egyptians, were black. And
yes.
He talked about that. So, yeah. Our elders back then, they knew the truth as well, Yeah. Just wondering, Chuck, on a similar note, are there any African historical figures that have inspired you as well from the continent?
I'd say, well, anciently it would be Imhotep for sure. I mean, you want to talk about a Renaissance man. I mean, the father of medicine, the scribe, grand vizier, architect. I mean, just absolute brilliance personified from the ancient world. From the modern world, Kwame Nkrumah. You're from Ghana, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of them. Patrice Lumumba. I tend to gravitate towards those freedom fighters, man, and you can't get more of a freedom fighter than the two of them. And Nelson Mandela, I would throw in as well, even though it is disappointing the way this South African situation turned out, insofar as the masses, the elevation of the masses, and the real breakup of that juggernaut that the South Africans, white South Africans, held. But certainly Patrice Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah, and it's no accident what happened to Patrice Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah. I mean, he was overthrown by the U.S. government, something they are still doing.
Yeah.
With those two combined. There was Queen Nzinga.
Yeah.
I don't know whether, Robin, y'all got into Queen Nzinga or not.
Yes, we have. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Queen Nzinga for sure. This comes to mind, and Hatshepsut, and yeah.
Okay. The sisters are in there for you as well.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. We can't do nothing without the sisters, man.
Exactly. On a similar note, I want to ask you, obviously you've joined us. We're really proud and honored to have you on our side. For you, why is Black history and the knowledge of history important in this day and age? What does it do for us?
It's paramount. I mean, Dr. Clark used to talk about, history is a clock. It tells you what time of day it is. It tells you in terms of your political, where you've been, where you are now, and where you need to go. You have to have a sense of history. Otherwise, you make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And since I've been exposed and been kind of charged up again by the Black Sacred and start really digging in and reading and buying more books, I'm starting to see, what those mistakes were, and us making some of the very same mistakes now, unfortunately. But it's a key. History is a key. The only way to know who you are and where you need to go, you need to know your history. And so to me, history is at the core. And that's the reason why I do what I do, in terms of trying to educate some of the young people about their history. History provides us with the collective and individual self-esteem that we need, because we are indoctrinated by our educational systems to see ourselves as less than when we have a glorious history to go back on. And of course, here in the United States, Black history is taught from the standpoint of slavery, as though that's our only history. So it's important that our people know who they are. I think that once our people know who they are, I think we'll be a lot more effective in negating some of the obstacles that are in our way. We have to know who we are. We have to kind of unlearn what we've been taught so we can take on this juggernaut that we're confronted with.
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely agree with that. Before we wrap things up, Chuck, I know that you've been more than just inspired by us. You've actually decided to teach. You've taken what you've studied from the Black Secret, and you've started to teach now with in your church circles. Yeah.
Yes.
So how has that been going? What kind of reception have you?
Is that I want to encourage people to check out the Black Secret. But I have enough material, from stuff that I've done in the past and stuff that's online to kind of infuse some enthusiasm into onlookers, while at the same time saying, y'all need to check this brother out. Because, George, it's frustrating to me because the value that the Black Secret provides is peanuts when you look at it from the context of what value you get out of it. And I'm really kind of disappointed that I haven't been able to get more people to sign up for the course. And it's a sad commentary. And I guess it's similar to a conversation I had recently with Dr. Kilimanjaro online. And I heard Dr. Clark, I think in that very same speech, "We Have No Friends," make reference to scholars that were contemporaries of his, dying almost penniless because we didn't buy their books. We did not support them. And for what it cost to have access to the encyclopedia of information that you get from the Black Secret, everyone and his brother ought to be signed up to that. Not watching this, who I call
BET, corrupt your mind.
Well, the Clairol brain. The last poets used to criticize, they call Clairol, take them home with dope in the arm and Clairol on the brain, meaning, this emulation that sits outside of who you are. This quest for seeking someone else's beauty standards when you are the most beautiful creature on the face of earth. And so it's that kind of nonsense and stumbling blocks that we have to overcome to get our people back on track. See, you asked me earlier about, what got me interested in it. I believe, here I'm at 72 years old. In 1970, 71, 72 is when I would say that's when there was a precipitous drop-off in our elevation, the track that African people were on. We kind of fell asleep. Right. We allowed integration, trying to integrate ourselves into other folks' communities and wanting to assimilate. And the beauty that Robin showed us recently with the the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, okay, when we weren't on that track of trying to assimilate. We were coming together and building off of one another. We lost all of that. And we were at a peak, I think, in the 70s during the Black consciousness movement. Sisters was rocking them beautiful fros, and, people were, into, Black pride, Black power. And we were on our way, but we lost our momentum, man. We gotta find a way to get it back.
Well,
and
Chuck,
history is, I think, is a part of that.
thank you
Yep.
so much for that. It's been a joy and a privilege to sit down and talk with you again. And I just want to say, we're going to get that back again. You know, we have everything we need. We have all of the resources we need. We just need to be motivated. And like you said, the Black Secret is the place to be if you want quality information about Black history from prehistoric time. Evidence-based, absolutely. Well documented and well illustrated as well. You can't get better than the Black Secret. I have to say that myself. And Chuck is on board. Chuck is a member of the Black Secret officially. He's our man in America. And, you know, we want everyone to do what Chuck is doing, which is to take the information and bring it to your community. Yeah, so thank you very much for that, Chuck. Really appreciate that.
Hey,
and by the way,
pleasure is all mine, believe me.
Yeah. Chuck says he's disappointed he's not got more people to sign up through his link. You know what? The link is here. It's going to be here when we actually put this on YouTube. So just go down into the descriptions and you will find Chuck's link. And you don't want to miss this opportunity because we have the most comprehensive Black history and entrepreneurial program on the internet. Thank you very much.
And you're getting some good exposure from my YouTube channel because I've gotten a lot of feedback.
Yes.
I took a number of those clips and I broke them up into smaller clips.
Yep.
And, you know, people are responding and I love it.
They are. And I would like to open the floor up. Brother Danny, Robin, any questions? Robin, do you want to answer Chuck's query about your critique of the great Chancellor Williams? Over to you, sir.
Yes, sir. My problem with Chancellor Williams is just 5 points of detail. Now, Dr. Williams was researching his book when he was in his 70s, and his book came out in 1971. And we have access to information now that he didn't have access to because the material hadn't been written yet. Moreover, some of the misleading information that Egyptologists were getting away with, Dr. Williams didn't know that they were faking some of the translations. So he was reading documents in good faith, not realizing that some of them had been deliberately mistranslated to make it look like something else was going on that wasn't going on. So Chancellor Williams, his thesis was that ancient Egypt stopped being unmixed African very early on in its history. And he came to that conclusion because there are inscriptions by ancient Egyptian pharaohs that more or less said they hated Black people, more or less said they're keeping Black people out of Egypt. And if Black people cross the border and enter Egypt, the ancient Egyptians were prepared to fight them. Now, what Dr. Williams didn't know is those inscriptions didn't say that. At the time, scholars were faking the funk. And the scholar that came out openly to say this inscription does not say that was Yusuf Ben Yochanan.
Dr. Ben.
And Dr. Williams's book came out, I think, the same time as Ben Yochanan. So Dr. Williams had no opportunity to read Ben Yochanan's material. That was one of the problems. The second problem is the Egyptologists were classifying the ancient Egyptian language as Afro-Asiatic, which sounds like a language that's halfway between an African language and an Asiatic language, i.e. a mixed population. We now know that there was nothing Asiatic about ancient Egyptian, nothing. And therefore, Dr. Williams's thesis that the culture was between Africa and Asian. We now know that that is incorrect. But at the time, Dr. Williams didn't know that the linguists were lying to him. And then the third problem that Dr. Williams couldn't explain, and many black scholars couldn't explain it until Schumacher Cater came along. It was thought that the differences between Africans and Europeans in terms of the skeletal data, the difference is the shape of the skull. And ancient Egyptian skulls are hard to interpret, just like East African skulls in general. Ethiopian skulls are hard to interpret. Somali skulls are hard to interpret. Ugandan skulls are hard to interpret. And so Dr. Williams accepted the view that only the broadest nosed, thickest lipped, highest cheekbones, those are the only ones that classifies Negro. He didn't know, as we now know through the work of Dr. Schumacher Cater. Again, Schumacher Cater didn't exist during the Chancellor Williams period. Schumacher Cater has shown that unmixed African types cross the whole range of appearances, from broad nose to narrow nose, from high cheekbones to flat cheekbones, to prominent jaws to orthognathic jaws. That data didn't come out until Schumacher Cater entered the fray. And by the time Schumacher Cater entered the fray, Chancellor Williams was dead. And these are the kinds of corrections. We don't just do that with Chancellor Williams. We do this with everybody. And later writers are going to do that with me. And it's all good. This is what scholarship does. Do you see?
Well, you know what, Robin? I think you just hit on a course right there. I could very easily see you take Chancellor Williams's destruction of Black civilization and make it this focal point of your entire lecture or segments of multi-segment lectures to break down that, because how many people, maybe based upon seeing you, your videos and what have you, will go buy the book, okay, and they interpret what's in that book literally, not knowing what you know. So that's, and you could very well do that with any number of the books. Ivan Van Sertima's that came before Columbus. I got a book here I haven't read yet. I think the brother passed away, Imhotep. His last name was Imhotep. And I think he was, it was a building on to what Ivan Van Sertima had done with They Came Before Columbus. And there was a lot of controversy about it, saying there was a lot of false information in it. But that's the kind of information I think that you do very well, that you have a really good way of breaking things down into understandable language that the layperson can understand. I mean, the way you broke down how we literally deteriorated from high civilization down to barbarism over a extended period of time was a thing of beauty. I wondered what happened to us, and the way
and the thing, and that wasn't my theory. That's Chancellor Williams's. You see, that comes from Chancellor Williams, and he's the only scholar that has that content. Yeah. So look at my work as correcting, putting the full stops where they should have been, crossing the T's where they should have been crossed, dotting the I's where they should have been dotted. And I haven't just done that with Chancellor Williams. I've done that with everybody, as far as I'm aware of. And that's what all writers are supposed to do. That's what all teachers are supposed to do. And in doing so, I've since found that a lot of my work is out of date. And And that's good, because what it now means is that there's more to add. There's things that we didn't know, reconstructions that we didn't have, etc., etc., etc. And that's what's supposed to happen as you write history.
Mm-hmm.
See, a lot of people have this idea that it's if you're Team Chancellor Williams, everything he said is right. And if you don't like anything, then you're hating. That's not how it is. If you love Chancellor Williams, you will want to correct, as we now have more information that he didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the scholarship moves forward.
Well, you certainly critiqued a number of them in the Black Secret coursework, but it wasn't like a detailed critique that I think that would be beneficial for folks that are, again, buying that book and not knowing that background information. We could probably do it through what we're doing right now, and that is, sharing that information with people. So as they read the book, they've got that context as they read it. That there's been new information that Chancellor Williams didn't have. So that's good stuff. I'm glad we got you on here, bro.
The thing is,
no respect, sir.
Yeah, Chancellor Williams is still great because you have to judge a person's work in context with the time that they existed. And as Robin said, these new evidences weren't available to him. Worse still, the mainstream Egyptologists were lying to him and lying to everyone else as well. So we need to be aware of that, Yeah.